Well, it was very poor. It was the poorest large city on these islands. It had gone from being the second richest city or most important city in the Union in 1800 to being smaller than Belfast. There'd been no real industry. It was all service industries. They made biscuits in Dublin, they brewed beer, they distilled whiskey, and they had a good transport system to service the rest of the country. But it was basically a service capital. It exported mainly raw materials, live cattle and so on, to the British market. The population had stagnated. It was very poor because there was lack of industry. What industries there were had been wiped out by the Act of Union. And the wealthier citizens actually abandoned the city. For the suburbs, they went to Kingstown, as it then was, Dunleary now. They went to Rathmines, they went to Clontarf. They left. They went to places where there was cleaner air and lower rates. And unusually for the United Kingdom at that time, commercial rates actually fell in Dublin in the century after the Act of Union. You actually paid less for your property in 1913 than you did in 1800, which was remarkable, because the property was worth less. So the city had less money, so it couldn't do the things that other cities did. I mean, you had like Belfast City Hall, for example. You go to Birmingham Town Hall, you have these magnificent works of architecture in the 19th century, but you don't have any of them in Dublin. Dublin is still looking at the Custom House across the way there, or City Hall, or the forecourts, which had all been built before the collapse of the economy, and the old houses of the very wealthy, the aristocracy and the professional classes, had been turned into tenements. So the city was very poor. You had about 20,000 families, 25,000 families living in slums, basically. 20,000 of them in one room, 1,500 of them in cellars. I mean, there was people literally eking out a life of misery. Wages were very low. The average wage for an unskilled worker was 18 shillings a week, and D.H. Hart, who was a famous social scientist of the time who did some sums on this, reckoned they had about 3 shillings a week to spare after paying all the basic bills for small family, man and wife and a couple of kids, which is one reason why huge numbers of them joined the British Army, because if you joined the British Army on your discharge, you could get 7 shillings a week as a reservist on top of your wages. So that could transform the lives of a lot of people. But the downside of that was, of course, if a war broke out, you were in trouble, as happened in 1914. But nobody obviously foresaw that then. But very, very poor city. Bread was the staple diet. If you look at the household budget, the biggest item on the household budget was bread. Women would buy loaves and loaves of bread to feed themselves and the kids. The husband would tend to get the lion's share of the good food, because especially if it was a docker or a carter or a coal heaver, because he had to be fit enough and strong enough to do the daily job. So the kids would often, I mean, the main course could often be dry bread and dripping, which is lard basically, and a dessert could be bread and sugar. So I mean, people lived at a very basic level. Milk, a lot of babies were fed really on weak tea. It was tea with a dash of milk added. So you had malnutrition was a big thing. The infant mortality rate was the highest, not only in Britain, it was the highest in Europe. So you had kids, large numbers of children dying of very preventable diseases like diarrhea, enteritis, measles, things that kids didn't normally get or certainly didn't die of in other towns and cities on these islands, but they did here. So health, public health was a huge issue. Lack of education in the tenements. I mean, a lot of them are gone now, but there used to be the length and breadth of Gardiner Street and Shaw McDermott Street. In those tenements, you would have a closet outside in the yard for every tenant, where they could go to the toilet. So people used to slap out like sort of a prison almost in the mornings. And the same with the water. You didn't have running water in a lot of the tenements. They had to get water, so that increased infection. The stairways in the houses were open to the street. You could just wander. I can still remember them myself. You could wander in off the street, and you could walk from top to bottom of the house unhindered. So people constantly coming and going, added to the traffic. Old wooden staircases. There would be no carpets or lino or anything on them. So very hard to keep clean, and wood is a great preserver of germs, one sort or another. So, it was a very unhealthy way to live.